Mr. Coffman, could you tell us where and when this interview is taking place?
Yes, this is taking place in my home in Pennsylvania, and it's in October the 10th at approximately 2 p.m.
And why are we doing this interview?
We're doing this interview for the internet site that we're getting ready to do, the website for Smoka.
Okay, as long as you mention Smoker, Sensei, why don't we just tell everybody what the word or the definition smoker means for those that may be hearing about it for the first time.
Okay. Smoka, S-M-O-K-A, means Shorin-ryu, a Matsumura Orthodox Karate Association.
Okay, now for a lot of people that are seeing you and hearing you for the first time, what we'd like to do in this interview is talk a little bit about how you got involved with the martial arts, with whom you got involved with, and through the years some of the things that you may have encountered. So what I'd like to do is start off by saying, how did you originally end up in Okinawa and for what reason?
Okay, well, originally I started karate in 1959 in a place called Clinton, Maryland. The instructor was in the Navy, a gentleman named Ski. He had studied Japanese karate. I went into service in 1960 and happened to draw by chance Okinawa was my first overseas assignment. That was my first exposure to Okinawan karate, or what I consider true karate. That is really the only karate that I claim is from Okinawa.
Now you mentioned Okinawa, Sensei. This is 1999 and you were there in 1960. Could you just briefly tell us what your first looks at Okinawa were and what kind of came to your mind?
Well, at the time I was a young man in Okinawa. Of course, I had heard about through the Second World War movies and that sort of thing. It was a very opposing, very dramatic place to be, Okinawa. Other than that, I knew nothing about it at all. Okinawa itself, the island itself is a rather small island. It's south of Japan. It is now part of Japan. Back in 1960, it was not part of Japan. It was independent on its own. We had military bases there and such and so forth. The island itself has changed drastically. I went back to Okinawa in 1994, I believe it was, and that was the first time since 1964 when I left Okinawa. The island had changed so much that I didn't even recognize it. Of course, the air base, Kadena Air Base, was where I was stationed. That was essentially still the air base with a lot of modifications and changes. The island itself was very rustic, very what we would call old-time. The only place that had sidewalks and streetlights at the time was Naha, which is the capital. We were stationed in Kadena Air Base, which is just about, I guess you could call midway in the island. And it's called Koza City today. BC Street was just starting to get streetlights and just starting to get some sidewalks. Other than that, there were none. There were no super highways as there are today. There was no commercial hotels as there are today. Today it's a resort island. Back then it was nothing more than a military intercept island and that sort of thing.
Okay, Sensei, so that gives us a pretty good background and tells us a little bit about what Okinawa was in the 60s. Now, how did you happen to then get into the martial arts? What was the reason behind it, and who did you encounter?
Well, as I said, I was stationed at Kadena Air Base in the Air Force, and I was an electrician. Well, it just so happened that Sensei Kise turned out to be my karate instructor. He was also a indigenous Okinawan worker that was an electrician, also stationed on Kadena. Well, my first assignments, I was assigned to Sensei Kise. We would work together as an electrician. Now, during the day, we would pick up our assignments, and we would go out. I would drive the truck. Kise Sensei said I don't think 5 words to me the first half day of work. And then after lunch we came back to the shop. For lunch we came back to the shop. And during lunch and such and so forth, I talked to some of the other employees and friends and airmen and such and so forth there at the electric shop. And they advised me that he was in fact a karate instructor. At that point, I asked Sensei Kise, right after lunch when we started to go back to work again, I said, are you in karate? Are you a karate instructor? His ears sort of perked up and he said, yes, I'm a karate instructor. And I asked him, I said, well, like everybody else, what can you do? Can you break a brick? And Sensei said, yes, he could break a brick. So at that point we went to get a friend of his, which is called Miyazato. Max is what we called him. We went out to one of the housing developments and they had bricks around flower beds and such and so forth. I ran over and I got one and we took it to a secure location, which was nothing more than in the field or something out away from everybody. And Sensei Kise in fact broke the brick for me as Max held it. From that day on, I was hooked, and that night I went to his dojo in Okinawa, and I've been in karate ever since.
Now, Sensei, one thing we're going to mention is as people are hearing this interview, they're also getting an opportunity to see some of the pictures of Okinawa, some of the people of Okinawa, that first encounter with Sensei Kise in the air base. Reason we're doing that is as you tell your story and explain these different areas and some of the things that you encountered and learned, we're also going to be putting up pictures. So what I would like to do now is have you describe that first dojo that you had with Sensei Kise and kind of give the people an idea of what they're looking at verbally as they see some of these pictures.
Well, Sensei and Kise and I had finished work. We got on a bus and we rode it to Okinawa. Then we walked from the bus stop to Sensei Kise's home. Sensei Kise's home was a double, as one half of the home, one part of the home was his living quarters, the other half was his karate studio. Now, try to picture, if you will, a very small, rustic, old house. Okay, we'll put it that way. Mud roads leading to the studio and such and so forth. Drainage ditches, metal roofs, thrown together different types of wood to form the house. Sliding doors. You open the 2 sliding doors and you enter, and there was a small alcove where you took your shoes off and then you stepped up onto the dojo floor itself. I would guesstimate that the dojo was probably no more than 8 foot by 12 foot, something like that. And that was the studio. It was very rustic on the walls. Sensei Kise had some drawings and paintings of karate techniques, the katas in which you learned both in English and in Japanese, and then some makiwara, punching boards, where you beat your hands and developed your chops and your forearms and your blocking techniques and such and so forth.
Now, Sensei, at this time, how much Japanese did you actually know, and how much English did Sensei Kise know? How was the communication between the two of you?
Well, basically, Sensei Kise spoke little to no English, although he spoke 100 times more English than I did Japanese. My Japanese was little to nothing, although I became semi to quite proficient in using the language, both Okinawan, the Hogan, and the Japanese itself. Sensei Kise could speak some basic English, although very little, nothing technical. Like you couldn't ask him what a part of the body was or anything like that in English. He wouldn't know. So during the instruction, and at the time, I was the only American there in the class. and somewhat considered to be Sensei Kise's first American student. However, there was one fellow there that I remember prior to me. He was a green belt. His name was Smith. That's the only thing I can remember is the gentleman wore glasses. He would have been before me and possibly the first American student of Sensei Kise's there. Now, Sensei Kise would demonstrate the exercises. You would follow the katas, the blocks. When an Okinawan that was in the class did something wrong, he would verbally tell him and then go over and correct the block or the positioning. When I did something wrong, he would hit me first to get my attention, then he would correct the block or the punch or whatever. Therefore, embedding that if you do something wrong, you get struck. And that was the means in which we were taught at that point.